Welcome to hopefully the first of many videos on post-processing. If you've attended one of my workshops, then I'll have sent you a link to this. It's not something I'm going to advertise, to be honest. It's just going to be a recording of me editing a picture. So the video itself probably won't be edited because I want you to see all of the kind of mistakes that I make or things that I try and then back out of. So you can sort of figure out that it isn't a kind of a done deal, right? Just the same principle that we applied during the practical part of the workshop. It's all about how you actually reach those conclusions and how you actually reach those decisions about what to process and how to do it. So we're going to start off in Lightroom, which is where I keep all my images. So I highly recommend this workflow. I've tried a number of different things, but this works for me. Everything is launched from here. So first thing we're going to do is just select an image. So obviously a lot of the early images, of course, that we shoot in the film strip are, we're getting things going, right? So early on. So there's nothing actually wrong with this image. I set the white balance in the camera just so that we could see them. So we can set it to auto, or we can put it to, I don't know, what did we go for at the end of the day? It was flash, something like that, and then maybe warm it up slightly, and it looks, or we can copy the white balance of another one, right? So this is 7100 minus 3 if we want the same. We can just type it in. We could sync it, but it's only one thing, so we'll put it to the same. So we've got all these images. Now, there's a number of ways of selecting things in Lightroom. You can see I've had a play with some of these already, but one of the things I like to do is to select images that are kind of similar in type, and then use what they call the survey mode. So you just press N, select a bunch of images, press N, and away we go. Just shift me into the corner there. And then the idea of the game here is to zap the ones that that have something wrong with them, really. So we're going to get rid of all the toolbars there. Just press Shift and Tab to do that. So you just press the X on the things that you don't want. Now, much as I love Nadine's smile, we're probably going to go for a serious model type look at the moment, so we're going to bin all those just to make it. I quite like that one actually. She's kind of looking away, but not in a deliberate way there, and got her eyes closed on that one. That one's quite funky, but I might do that one later. And again, we're going to get rid of all these other goofy ones as well. And every time we do that, Lightroom kind of rewards you in a way, by sort of making all the pictures bigger that are left behind. So, I think we've zapped most of the goofy ones. I don't like that one. There's kind of like a lazy look in the eye there. Nothing to do with Nadine's ability, of course. It's just when I've pressed the button. Ultimately, the responsibility is that of the photographer to make this work. I'm going to go for something fairly standard on this one, I think. And I think we're going to probably do these. So I'm going to bin off these ones which came later when we did the coloured edge. I'll come back to those, but for this one we're just going to do a standard beauty type arrangement. That one's quite nice under there. So we've got mouth open, mouth closed, dead on, and sort of 45 degrees. So I'm going to choose something that's fairly innocuous to start off with. So I think I'm kind of zooming in on this one. That's quite nice, and also this one. I do like the smile though, that's the thing. Now we can come in and out of survey mode. If you want to have just a quick look at the image, you can do that, and then you can go back in to survey mode just by pressing N again. And of course, all it's doing, when you press those crosses, it's, as well as it going away from survey mode, it deselects them. So what we do at the end of this is we're going to star or tag these in some way, the ones that are left. So they're going to be our sort of picks, if you like. I'm quite happy with these. I mean, that one's kind of like a bit nondescript. That's a bit nondescript as well. I quite like these expressions. Might go with this one actually. I think we might go with this one for now. So we'll come back out into grid view. In grid view, if we tag, then it does all of the ones that are selected. In other views like develop module, it doesn't. If you've got multiple images selected, it still just does the one that you're actually looking at. So I'm going to go in on this one. So we're going to go back to the develop module. And so we have a look at the image, and you know, we can see histogram over there, and we can see, you know, all the different things. So the first thing I'm going to do is to decide what profile I'm going to use. Now, there's a number of profiles in there. I've got mine to default to camera standard. I think out of the box, Lightroom defaults to, I think it's Adobe Color now. And we can try that. It kind of, you know, I don't really like it. I find for these Nikon cameras that the camera profiles work better. So if we look at, there's the original one, which is camera standard, and we're going to do camera portrait, which is a bit more even. Now I like to work with the picture in a more sort of even, flat fashion to begin with, and that preserves the maximum amount of detail throughout the processing. And then if I need contrast at the end, I'll put it on at the end. Now, if you want the really flat image, the absolutely nothing done to it, then camera flat is the way to go. And sometimes you see pictures like that when they come into Lightroom, and then as Lightroom starts to then apply the default profile, which is encoded by the camera in the EXIF, then the image changes before your eyes, and sometimes it kind of like makes it look really bad. So we could go with that. There's an in-between one, there's camera neutral. So we look at that, camera portrait, camera neutral. I think the camera portrait thing is okay. Let's just check that again. Camera neutral. I might go with neutral. It's not set in stone, you know, but it's harder to undo contrast than it is to add it. That's the way I always feel about this. But camera flat, I think, is possibly a little bit flat. Always remember to look at it in the thumbnail, or the smaller version and the bigger version, because you'll see the overall tones will be a lot more apparent. You know, the overall look of the image will be a lot more apparent in this view than it is in this view. But you're going to see some of the details and stuff like that, which are maybe going to be affected, like skin texture. So Adobe Color, you know, after looking at those, you think, what were they thinking? Even Adobe Portrait, yeah, it's still a bit crunchy. So I think camera portrait, or maybe camera neutral. I think camera neutral maybe. If you want to look at these in sort of preview, you can wave your mouse over them, but I find this just a bit cumbersome because the machine tries to calculate everything as you're scrolling up and down. It tends to get a bit sticky. But there's also a bunch of creative ones that you can use down here. You know, there's all this. If I use these at all, I tend to do them on the resulting TIFF, because it's then like an overlay. It's like a sort of a lookup table, which you can apply. So I'm going to go with that. Now, the next job to do is to sort of figure out what we're going to do about black and white points and the midtones. So I normally end up, I'm going to raise the shadows a little bit more and look at the white point, but again, it starts to generate those really nasty sort of hot spots on the skin if we do that too much. So we're going to bump it up slightly, but not too much. Now you can, you know, to counteract that, you can sometimes lower the highlights. But I find again that doesn't really do a lot of good things. So we've got, Nadine's got quite black hair. So we could try, what does the shadows do to that? We can raise it, but actually it kind of looks worse. So I'm going to leave that alone. We're just going to raise the shadows a little bit, and we'll just try the midtones, see where we are. And again, remember to look at the small version as well, and have a look at that. It's kind of okay. Let's just check that. We might, yeah, I mean, just add a tenth. Now, if you want to see how far you've come, hold the / key, which is the next to the shift on most keyboards on the left. Hold that down, and you'll see where you started. Okay. So what we've done is we've effectively flattened it out. The next thing to do is we're going to play around with the white balance a little bit. So, you know, 7100 is quite high, really, for flash. If we try the sort of bog standard flash, it's a lot cooler. All right. I think that's possibly a bit cool. Now, given this background was white, now if it's an absolute proper photographic white, then we should be able to use it as a reference. Obviously, it doesn't appear white because it's not being lit. You know, it's been lit by something because it's not black, but it's not being lit by the same level of light that's lighting the subject. So we can just get the eyedropper and click on that, and that will give, we could effectively using that white vinyl background as a gigantic grey card. And we can see that it's gone for 6700 -5, which is just a little bit cooler. And I think that's probably better. That tint is probably just a little bit green, if I'm honest. So I'm gonna just bring that back to where it was before, or maybe we can just zero it out. And just work with it like that. Okay, let's just check what that's done. So if we go back to before we started messing with the white balance, you can see it's just, I think that's just a little bit better. Okay, so this is a fairly easy one to retouch. It's purely just going to be a bit of skin cleanup, maybe some of these straggly hairs, and that's about it really. I mean, we might do some stuff with the hips and the lips, and the eyes, but before we do that, we're just going to turn on lens profile corrections. I was using the Nikon 70-200 f4, which doesn't really have any distortion at all. So you can see that almost nothing changes in terms of the shape of the image when you turn that on and off. With other lenses, it actually, you know, unbends, and it's quite dramatic. It has kind of, there's a little bit of vignetting, which it's removed, and I'm going to leave it off because we can add any vignettes that we want in a sort of a creative way later. And that's one of the things that I like to retain. I want my choices in the image, not you know, just as a result of some defect in the lens or some camera default or something like that. Okay, there's nothing really else I'm going to do on this one. When you use wacky colors, then sometimes I'm going to mess with the HSL and adjust individual colors, you know, and again we can do that with the tone curve. You know, we can mess with the individual colors, we can even mess with the colors down here, the color balance and the colors specifically in the shadows. There is one more thing which I sometimes do, which is apply a bit of split toning, and I have a preset here, and what that does, it's very subtle, but it's applied a bit of blue in the shadows and a bit of a warming in the highlights, and this is affecting this panel only, and you can see what it's done. It's got a little bit of this, which is sort of beige colour, just a tiny bit in the highlights, and a tiny bit of this in the shadows. And you can see the effect by toggling that on and off. Now, you know, we can shift the balance, so I'd probably go more, have it balance it more towards the sort of shadow end, and it produces quite some nice tones. And this is this kind of toning is done on a lot of sort of beauty and cosmetic shots in magazines that you'll see, and it's a neat little trick which you can do quite conveniently in Lightroom. A million other ways to do it in Photoshop, with curves and all kinds of things, but it has no place really on the base image. Okay, you know, because then once it's locked in, once you edit this in Photoshop, these choices are locked in, right, including the white balance, the color space and all of that stuff. So we're going to just go back to before we did that, and I think we're good to go. So next we're going to open this image in Photoshop, and that's quite easy. We just right click and do edit in and Photoshop CC 2019, which is the latest version with all its little foibles and annoyances. And I'll see you there in the next video. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop, and first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a look around the image and just figure out what we've got to do. I might just even out some of the curves in liquify. There's not a lot to do here at all, to be honest. There's a few bumps on the hairstyle there, and I'm going to use this the forward warp tool, forward warp, and I'm just going to even out some of those there. Not a lot to do. Make the brush about the same size as the thing that you're trying to nudge, and it's just do little movements. Okay, and then you think, well, okay, I'm just going to adjust the entire curve there, so you make the brush a bit bigger, and that's just rounded that off. There's another flat bit there, so we want our curves to be curved. It's just a little bit to even out there. There we go. There we are, that's nice, and we can click the preview and you can see already that we're making a sort of adjustment there. One little tip about the preview thing, it leaves this selected, right, this little tick box here, which means now nothing will happen. So when I click on there, it just, oh, it has actually unclicked on that one. They must have fixed it in this version, but you used to have to right click on there to make that happen. Right, other things that we need to do, not a lot really. You know, if people have got obviously crooked faces, then you can adjust them, but Nadine has very straight features. I'm maybe just going to knock this curve out a bit, out of the shoulder, just slightly. Just to make it sort of one continuous concave curve. And I'm going to look at the end of the collarbone now, which sometimes sticks out. Not really a problem on Nadine's shoulders, but this is more an issue with really slim people, is that you see the bones sticking out on either side. Right, we'll just nudge that arm in just slightly. Okay, but that's it, I think. There are you know, a million of other things that you could do. There's sort of automatic face features on here that we can try. Sometimes I do make the eyes just slightly bigger, but again, okay, so we need to check preview, and yeah, no more than 10, probably not anywhere near that amount on here actually, probably about 6. Something like that, and then just click that on and off. You can see it's just slightly bigger, but don't mess with these in a dramatic way, right? Especially if the person in the picture is likely to see it. If it's a purely creative thing, do what you like, right? But you know, as we're doing this for sort of a workshop, and again, once the picture's smaller, it's important that you carry on looking at your images, big and small. You can see differences. So I just spotted there's another little flat spot there on the hairline. So we've dealt with that. Okay, now you can change people's expressions and do things like that with this. There are some slidey ways to do this. I find these don't work particularly well. I mean, I think we can all agree that's pretty terrible. Sometimes it kind of works all right the other way. It tends to be more successful decreasing smile than increasing it, but I tend not to mess with that at all, if I'm honest. Again, if people have got big chins, foreheads, you name it, then you can do that. Reducing the jawline sometimes is okay. You can do that just in a little subtle way. So there's all the changes that we've made in Liquify, not a lot. We'll go back and those are applied. So the rest of it now is going to be cleanup. So it's to start with the big things to clean up, and I tend to use the patch tool for that. To be honest, there aren't really any on here that we need to do. The classic things are, everybody's got little lines under the neck, but it depends on the lighting how much they're going to show up. I don't really see them on this particular image. We've got the usual little blemishes and things like that, which we'll deal with the healing brush. But that's about it. I don't really see any jobs here for the patch tool, so we're going to skip straight to the healing brush. And this is the regular healing brush, not the spot healing brush. It's the one you need to specify a clone source. So I'm using the spacebar to make the hand, and then I'm going to make this a bit bigger because it is feathered. This, right? So it's feathered like that. So we're just going to select something that's nearby and just go over these things. Now, it kind of makes sense to work in a direction, so I'm going down the image, because if you just work at random, you risk sort of cloning one blemish over the top of another, right? And I'm still using the same fixed distance, so it's selecting from that same point above the bit that I'm cloning out, that I'm healing out. Right, so it's not selecting from the same point that I started with over here. It's always in relation to the bit that I'm actually doing, and you can just carry on doing this until it all of a sudden doesn't work, because you're selecting from some random bit of eyebrow or off the side of the image. So this one, for example, I can see that's going to be, it's too much hair has been cloned in there, so we're going to get something on a bit more of a diagonal there, and then I'm going to go back to vertical for these. It's just a question of just quickly dabbing rather than painting, if you can get away with it. Make the brush a bit bigger to suit the blemish that you're trying to go over. So keep it kind of in line. That one was not quite successful. There we go, that's better. So sometimes you just got to mess with the clone source, and we're going to work from the bottom up on this one, because obviously we're approaching the underside of the eye. We don't want bits of eyeball on the skin. Now, this is an interesting piece here. This is kind of what I'd class as a permanent feature, and if this was a regular portrait, I probably wouldn't take this out. But this is a sort of beauty image. It's not a family portrait, so we're going to have a go at painting this out. Now, we need to be careful here about how we do this, because obviously we need to continue the line, but we could end up just taking that line out. Now, what we'll do for this, because it's a bit risky, we'll stick it on a new layer. For the other ones, I'm not really too bothered, but sometimes I have different layers at different opacities for the healing. So I can do some that I don't want to take out entirely, and I sort of categorize them like that. So for this now, we just need to make sure the current and below is set, otherwise it won't do anything, and then we can kind of play around, and if we completely mess it up, and just, to be honest, we've done a pretty good job there, we can just delete that layer and start again. We can just get rid of it. But I think that's kind of worked. We're going to carry on this layer for a while. Make that a little bit smaller again. There's a kind of thing along the line there, so I'll just get rid of that in one go. Now, we don't really want to mess with these too much, because that's part of the smile, right? But there's kind of some bits we don't need for the expression, just in there, so we'll get rid of those. But these lines here we kind of need. If you get rid of those, it's going to look a bit odd that she's smiling without moving a muscle. And again, these lines here on the eyes, depends on the type of image and the age of the subject. Now, Nadine's really young, so we can get away with removing those entirely, right? If you're doing an older subject, they're going to have those lines. So what I would do in that case is just reduce the contrast around those areas, or maybe do a clone on a layer or a heal on a layer, and then reduce the opacity. So the rest of this is pretty much the same. You can fast forward past this bit, although we might come up against some difficulties, in which case I'll be working on how to overcome those. Just going checking back over here. Sometimes you get blind to this stuff because you've been looking at a particular area for so long. So just check back up the top. Check for these little micro lines in the forehead, which we don't want in this particular case. How many of these little hairs that we clone out is, again, more of an artistic thing, to be honest, than anything. You know, they're there. And if you tried to get rid of the lot, it would probably look a little bit odd. And have a check around the hair for little flecks of dust or dandruff or whatever it is. Or sometimes they're just little minute reflections. Sometimes they're dust on the monitor, right? And I have tried healing those out. When you've got hairs like that, just make sure you line it up so that Photoshop does a pretty good job of sort of filling in the gaps when that happens. Now she's got a piercing hole here, but it's kind of hidden by the hair, so I don't think there's anything we need to do to that. Have a look at the lips. We're going to make another layer for the lips, I think, just in case it needs reducing, because you don't want to remove all the texture from the lips, but these big cracks I find it can be a little bit off-putting, so we'll just heal those up just a touch. I think that looks pretty good. Now this thing I think we'll deal with in a different way, because we're going to need to go up to the edge. Now you can see that don't let your model drink from a cup, right? Because it was a workshop, I didn't say anything, but this is what happens. Of course, we've got lipstick up the sides here, and it's come off on the inside. This is actually quite a bit of a pain to do, but we'll come back to that after we've done the cleanup. So let's carry on down. I'm going to make the skin changes texture down here, and the everything kind of scales up. So we scale our brush up to match, and we'll just carry on moving down. Again, Nadine has really good skin, so there's no kind of major issues to deal with here. It really is really simple, this stuff. And you know, if you're only publishing these at web size, and most of the things I do are, you don't really need to do this level of cloning. This stuff won't even show up, but I find it doesn't really take too long once you get up to how these tools work and have a bit of practice. So I just generally get on with it and just do it, and then I know that if I need to use the image for something or print it, that it will be good in the future, and it won't have any kind of, like, you know, crude, blurry ways of well, that didn't really work, did it? Let's get rid of that. Sometimes for hairs, the spot healing brush, which is a form of content aware fill, the way I've got it set up, works better. And in that case, yeah, I think that's done a better job. So we can come across there. Now for this one, we'll do it separately. And it's not really worked that time. Or that time. I think it's just too small, that bit of hair. I think we'll leave that bit. Yeah, but sometimes for hairs, especially, that content, that spot healing brush rather than the regular healing brush works better. Now again, zoom out and we can see there's a line there, which wasn't really that obvious when we were zoomed in. So we're gonna just go down there like that. Try different sources. There we go. And we can see now there's some sort of bigger patches now we're zoomed out, which will do. Always got to be mindful from where you're cloning from. Stay away from the edge. Look at the creases in the shoulders. You need some. but I think we can get away with just removing these extra ones here and just blending that in. Right, now obviously we can carry on going forever with this, but I'll look around the face at this medium zoom, and I see a few little patches and distracting things, so I'm just going to deal with those. Take down on the chin there. Now we'll look at these bags under the eyes. These could do with lessening a bit, but probably not going to take these across. So I've created a new layer for these, which I'm probably going to take the opacity down on. I'm going to use a really wide brush, and I'm just going to take them out entirely, and the same on this side. Right, that's not really worked because I've got we started off at the wrong place there, so get rid of that, and then we'll reduce the size of the brush a little bit and just blend that in. Now it kind of looks a bit odd, right, with those gone. You know, there are some people from some parts of the world, some sort of Asian people, that do kind of have very flat, very little shadow under the eyes, but Nadine does. So what we're going to do is we're going to put those back in just a little bit. We could also try just clipping a curves layer to the and reducing the contrast. Okay, so reduce the highlights, increase the shadows. Just see what that looks like on and off. Set the blend mode for that to luminosity so it doesn't change the colours. Dial that in a bit, and then we can see what the whole look looks like. That's about right, maybe a little bit more. So it's on 30% now. We're going to put it to about 42. 42 is the answer, as we all know. Right, I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to collapse those. So this is kind of where my processing might differ from some of the tutorials that you've watched. I don't keep all the layers. There's a couple of reasons. One, it tends to slow the machine down to a crawl. And I'm working on an 8-core i7 with 24 gig of RAM, a 4 gig video card, and a 1 terabyte SSD with the swap file and the Lightroom catalog on it. And it's still slow. A lot of the tutorials you'll see online, they're working on a smaller version of the image in Photoshop. But obviously I'm trying to do this for real, just to mess with that eyebrow there a little bit. So come back to one of the 100% layers, and we'll just fill that little gap in there. Oh, not that one, don't like that one. There's a little bit of distracting mess just there. And we'll just fill in. Oh, that's not worked. There we go. There we are. Okay. Let's just check what we've done there. It's not quite finished. You see there's a bit of lightness just on the there we go. Let's see what we've done there. There we go. Okay. The other reason why I collapsed the stack is because otherwise I'd just mess with this forever. I'd go back to the layer and nothing would ever get done. So we're just going to flatten the image every now and again to commit the changes. Now, I don't really want these, and I'm going to use the clone stamp to get rid of it for a couple of reasons, but the primary one is that it's the only tool that obeys the selection boundary, and this is an easy selection to make because we've got a nice flat grey background. I don't want that, I want that. So here's the clone stamp tool, 100%, 100% soft. That's exactly what we want. And now I don't need to do all of it with the clone stamp, but I need to make a gap. So all we need to do is just separate the hair out a little bit. We'll do the same down here. This bit is a bit indistinct, so I might end up doing all of it with the clone. But I can get a big clone brush on here, see if we can get away with that. Sometimes you can. Depends on what the graduation's like, really, on the background. You can hide the selection by pressing Ctrl H, just to see what it looks like. But remember to put it back on, otherwise you'll be wondering why your tools don't work. Then we're going to deselect it, and then I'm just going to get the lasso tool. I'm just going to select that, press Shift F5, content aware fill, color adaptation on, and let Photoshop fill that in. Now the reason why I do that and not do it with the clone stamp, and it's not particularly demonstrable on this image, but there will be a gradation of grey across there, and if you just clone, then it's not going to be quite right. But content aware is going to deal with that, and it's going to fill in the stuff absolutely perfectly. And there's a little bit left there. I've lost my previous selection, but no problem. As I say, it's a really easy selection to make. And we'll just get the clone stamp again, smaller one, and just take it away. There we go. So that's those hairs gone. We're going to have a look around. Now, we don't want to delete absolutely everything from every little straggly hair. So we're going to do this on a new layer. So press Ctrl J, get yourself a new layer. And one of the things we can try, as before, we can try the spot healing brush, which is a sort of content aware. It's just a nice convenient way of using it, and you can see it's working fairly well. We can just go over these hairs, and Photoshop then does a good idea of identifying the thing that you wanted removing. Now if you do get too close to the sort of mass of hair, it is going to start to blur it, so just be careful that you don't do that. And as I say, leave some of these, because otherwise they're going to look a bit, the edge is going to look a bit perfect. She's going to look like she's got Lego hair, which is probably not a good thing. And again, if we want to, because we're doing this on a separate layer, we could lower the opacity afterwards. Now, this big bit here, we could just start going into it like this. In fact, while we're here, there's a bit of dust on the sensor there, so I'll just zap that. You can tune, especially hairs that go across the flow, kind of look a bit jarring. So I'm just going to go over all of those bits there. You can do this with things like dust and scratches as well, which is more of a global look, and it depends on what scale the image is at. Now this, it's all about the face, this one, so we're quite zoomed in, so we have to be a little bit more meticulous with our adjustments. We can't just be able to pull at a gate. Again, zoom out every now and again to have a look and see what you've done. Okay, it's fairly subtle so far. back in. In fact, we could try, we'll collapse that one, get ourselves another new layer and do dust and scratches. So let's have a look at that. Now, this is quite blurry. I'm going to put the threshold down to 0 just to get rid of all of the hair, but we don't quite want that level of blurring. Now, dust and scratches takes a little bit of a time to update, and we want to get it till all the things we want gone are still gone, but the minimum amount of blur. So we think it would actually take quite a bit to get rid of that. So if we put it up to 73, you see it's still kind of there. So I think the best that we can hope for with this is to put it down to somewhere around 11. Press OK, let it actually produce the real one of that. You can use this to posterize your image and do all kinds of other funky stuff with dust and scratches. It's quite an interesting process. But obviously we don't want it on the rest of the image, so we're going to put a black mask on that. I'm going to get a brush on white, 100% soft, and we can try sort of painting over this. Now, you know, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I don't really like the look of that, if I'm honest. Right? You know, we could paint over that. It doesn't really do a lot for me. So I'm going to bin that off. We're going to get another layer and we're just going to carry on zapping with the content aware spot healing brush. So we can just go down there like that. And for that one, for that one. Or we could try a bit of a clone. And just put the fence up before we do that. So we're going to select these areas around the ear. Okay, let it refine the edge every now and again. And we kind of need some of this hair, I think. Maybe. The quicker thing to do, of course, is to tidy the hair on set. But again, wasn't the primary focus in a real shoot. Oh dear, I've still got the wrong tool selected. Right, we want the clones, not that one, we want the clone stamp, thank you. Again, we can go over some of these things here. We can go right up against the ear there. Maybe taper that in a little bit. Just reduce the amount of hair down on the shoulders. Now this is going to look terrible when we deselect. Right, so if we hide the selection, you can see that there's now a hard edge on that stuff. Now we can either sort of feather it back in, but to be honest, that doesn't really do a lot either. Or we can put a mask on, like so. In fact, no, we need to undo that because we've still got the selection active. So deselect, put the mask on, then get a black brush. So there we go. And we can just feather that in. Now we could leave the ear section and then just go around here, just let the feather of the brush bring some of that stuff back in, knock that big one out. Right, and then once we've done this, so we've got a bit of a hard edge there. There we go. We could use the pen tool, cut the neck out, do that, but it's another kettle of fish. I just want to tidy this one up, and just to make that sort of bit round, we're going to just put that back in because it looks a bit odd with it coming round and disappearing. So just check what you've done. I think that's kind of okay there. I think we can probably get away with getting rid of that bit under the ear there. And I'm just going to use the clone stamp. We've got no selection active. Just press Ctrl H to just check you haven't hidden it. And I'm just going to get this here. I'm going to put it on 50%. Just get it out from about there. Make sure we're on the. Let's put it back up to 100. See what that does. Oh, that's because we're on current. We need current and below on there. Well, we don't, to be honest, because it's a duplicate layer, but I don't see this cloning at all. It usually means I've done something. It's definitely working. We don't have any selections. Oh, it's because of the mask, isn't it? So let's disable the mask. That's it. So you can see all the terrible things that we've just done. So let's undo those. Go back to the layers and disable the mask again, and then we can just have a go at the smaller clone. In fact, let's put up a selection again around there. There we go. More against the skin rather than the edge of the hair. Just remove it off there. See if that produces a reasonable edge. Not quite. Probably not going to remove all of this though, so it's not critical what this selection looks like. Let's get the clone again. Get rid of that stray one there. Now always remember that we've got the underlying layer, right? So this isn't a final thing by any means. We need a smaller. Okay, so that's looking okay. Let's just remove it entirely. Now, of course, we can select from outside the area. We just can't paint in it. In fact, we could probably tidy the top of that ear up a little bit. Okay, that's done a reasonable job. Let's expand it because we don't want any kind of hard edges on the clone. Get rid of those. There we go. Okay. So there's a tiny little bit left on the ear just there, and I'm probably just going to do this just by zooming in. Get rid of the selection and just, oh, not quite that clumsily though. I'll just select from out here, put it on there. In fact, that's a bit. I'm going to harden the brush up a bit, so 2 steps up. We're just going to take that off manually like that. And again, don't forget that we can just leave that one alone because it's going over the top of the ear rather than coming around the bottom. This bit here we can just get rid of as well. There we go. And there's a tiny bit here. We might end up, you can see when we clone in that it for some reason hasn't got rid of all of this. Isn't that odd? This could be the stuff that I did with the spot healing brush and it's left little tiny bits. There is a way of dealing with all this though, which I'm going to show you later. So let's zoom out on that. It's not terrible actually. Just clean like that. We can try and see what it looks like with and without. We can try enabling the layer mask. It's this bit here maybe. Looks a bit odd. And that's going to be too much bother for this image, I think, to clone out. So I think what we'll do is we'll start with a new layer mask. So I'm going to fill it with white. So I've got white there on the background, so that's Control and Backspace. That's going to fill that layer with white. And then I'm going to get my black brush again. Like so. Just not quite that big. Let's just get this little bit of extension here, and we'll leave that bit in. That bit's a mush. That's all mush. We might have room for just a little bit here. Again, we can switch to white. Just feather that in just a little bit. Right, let's have a look. Okay, not too bad. Right, so the background, we're going to duplicate the layer, and with the selection tool selected, we're just going to press this magic select subject button, which does a fantastic job of selecting the subject most of the time, and indeed it has here. So we're just going to make sure we've got that little bit of hair using the refine edge brush. There we go, and just go around the edges with it as well. Just make sure you've got all the hair. Increase the radius, which makes it more likely to grab those things. Press OK. You can see it's done some funky stuff over here. Sometimes it does the reverse of what you want, the refine edge brush. So if that's the case, just go and manually select those bits. Now we want this selection to be quite generous. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to modify the selection. We're going to do expand by about 8 pixels, and there we see it gets expanded, and we're then going to feather it by 2 pixels, I think. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to cut her out. I'm going to zoom the image out a little bit because it's the vignette that I want to protect here. So now we've got no subject on this layer. You can still see her because she's on the layer below, but if we do that, we can see that she's gone. Because what we're going to do now is just Gaussian blur, and we're going to take it up to about 90 odd, maybe a bit less for this one. Let's try about 50, which is just going to blur out. Maybe that's not working, because we just need to make sure that we blurred out any of the sort of remnants that we made. Press OK. Now this has now produced a perfectly smooth graduation, which doesn't match with the rest of the image, so we need to put the noise back in. So do noise, add noise, 1% monochromatic Gaussian noise, okay, and that will get rid of any banding that's in there. Now you can see that's kind of eaten into the edges of the model, so we're now going to paste back what we cut out earlier, so Control Shift and V, and then do Control Shift and V again, and you'll see the hair come back. And you know, if you want more, just keep stamping the model on top. So now we've got 2 of those, so I'm going to collapse those down and then collapse that one into that one, and then just toggle it on and off just to see has it fixed what you wanted to fix. And I think we can see just in these areas here and around here where we did the work, you can see that it is now tidier. but also make sure that it hasn't wrecked anything else. So I'm looking in the corners and around the vignette, and it's still pretty much stable because these are kind of much bigger scale changes, so that's okay. So we're going to knock that down. Now we're going to get back to the skin, and I'm going to set up a frequency separation layer. Now there's lots of actions you can use to do this. I'm not going to go into the maths, but effectively what it's going to do is put the texture on one layer and things that are bigger than the texture onto another layer. But we need to decide where that boundary is. And frequency separation is not a retouching technique, okay? It's something that you set up and then use retouching techniques within, okay? So it's not just something that people say, you know, I applied frequency separation. Well, no, you didn't. You can apply some healing or cloning and things like that within a frequency separation layer, which protects texture or protects tone depending on which layer you're working on. So we're going to play that action, and the name of the game here is to anything that is blurred out is going to be on the high frequency layer. Okay, so we've reduced it to 0. You can see all the skin detail. Now we want to keep that, so we're going to move the slider on this Gaussian blur until all of that texture is gone. Okay, so it's going, and to be honest, I know from experience that a full-size headshot like this, it's about 8.5, which is why my action defaults to that. Well, that's it. Everything else is going to be on the low frequency layer, and that's primarily, well, almost exclusively, it's what we're going to work on. I very rarely touch the high frequency layer. It's almost always evening out tones. So we're going to do that, get rid of the message, the layers, and now we've got this folder. So here's the high frequency and there's the low frequency, and you can see that if we toggle this on and off, there should be no difference. Sometimes you do notice minor little pixel shifts, but really there's no difference. We're going to select the low frequency layer, and this time what we're going to do is for a base treatment, what I'm going to do is select areas of like sort of tone, but I'm also going to use it to soften the highlight, so I'm going to make sure that highlight is included. I'm going to select it. I've got a feather of about 9 pixels on here, anything like that will do. Now you'll see things like Gaussian blur magically appear on mine, and that's because I've got it bound to a button on my tablet because I use this all the time. So I'm probably going to blur it just slightly more than the separation value. So we've now done it by 10 pixels, okay? And then we can deselect that. And if we want to check what that's done, we can just toggle on and off the frequency separation layer. Now there's going to be a bit more work to do on this. For example, this area here, and I have the other button on my tablet set up to repeat the last filter. So it's going to do, I've just done that Gaussian blur about 4 or 5 times more on that, and then deselect. Now you might think, why don't I just use a bigger value to blur it? But I could do, but it would start to blur in things from over here, and it would become completely flat. So I want to retain those gradations in tone, but by doing it more and more and more, it evens it out, but on the same scale, if that makes sense. So we're going to select the rest of the face, but I'm going to deselect the eyes because I don't want any of that sort of contaminating my blur. It's not a problem for it to blur the eyes because I'm going to mask this off, the areas that I don't want blurring, in a second. I'm going to do the lips separately as well, so oops. So I'm using the Alt, holding the Alt key down to subtract from the selection, and then you can hold the Shift to add to the selection. There we go. I'm going to just get rid of that nose bit as well, and then I'm going to repeat the blur, and probably just once on that global sort of face area is fine. I'm going to even out the sort of tones under the eye there. There we go. And same on this side. Okay, and again we're going to do the zoom out in a minute because then other things will become apparent, but I can see a little bit of mess there on the chin, and that just flattens that out just nicely. Let's just check. Yeah, we need to do a bit more on bits, so don't worry about that overly much. Right, now this is a really easy shape to do. We could even use the quick select or the select subject to do this, and then just subtract things from it. I'm going to do it like that. I'm not going to bother about that because I'm going to use that on the mask, but what I will do is get rid of this really dark and light together is going to produce a bit of a mush. So I'm going to do one sort of base area on that, and now I'm going to zoom out, and we can now see sort of areas of tone that kind of need a bit more blending. So we can see on the forehead there, so we'll just zap back quite a bit. We can see the sort of micro veins and things like that on the darker areas of skin across the chest, so I'm going to select those. I don't want to blur the tones across the collarbone there anymore, because I want to keep that definition. So even though I mask it off, that's going to still soften those more than I want. So that I'm just selecting the sort of areas of light tone on this bit. Get that patch on the arm there, and it's more the sort of mid-tony areas that tend to benefit from this more than highlights and shadows. Right, so I do that there. Still a bit more needs doing on there. There we go. Sometimes you do just have to increase the blur value, but on this occasion I think we're okay. It seems to be working. Again, it depends on what the skin is like to begin with. Nadine has excellent skin, so we're pretty lucky there. Okay, now I'm going to have a look at the lips, and I know I'm going to need to do some work specifically on the lips because of the missing lipstick, but I just want to see just what that looks like. Top lip looks okay. Bottom lip, yeah, I think that's okay actually. Now, another technique that we can use, which is slightly less reliable. So what I'm going to do is, actually before we do that, we're just going to take care of that little hot spot on the nose. And this is quite an efficient way of getting rid of little hot spots, you know, specular highlights. You can see it's softened that quite nicely. But we're going to make a duplicate layer of that low frequency layer now, because sometimes this can get out of hand. And we're going to use this thing called a mixer brush. Now the way I have the mixer brush set up is it's 30-30-30 flow at 5%, which is pretty high actually. You could knock it down to sort of 1 or 2%, but I have no load on the brush. Okay, so because I just want to mix the tones that are already there. I don't want to deposit any. It's like, it operates a bit like a wet paintbrush. This is, in fact, I think it's called the wet paintbrush or mixer brush or something like that. But I don't want to do that. I don't want to paint on the image. I just want to blend things together. We tend to do this a bit more zoomed out, and we're going to look at the areas of tone. And usually what I'm aiming to do here on a soft brush is just make the lines straight. Okay, so I'm going to blend areas of light tone just by going over them slightly like that. And if you want to see what that's doing, just toggle that new layer on and off, and we can look at this here and go, this I'm just spreading the lighter area across into the darker area, and I can just even that up just by going across it there. There we go. And again, check. You see that little bump has gone now. Again, on the arm here, we can just even those tones out just a bit, and across the clavicles. Okay, and then these necklines as well usually benefit from a bit of just making them more sort of graphical and straight, and sometimes the jawline. So it's a cross between painting and blending, and we can now see what we've done there. And you can see that these lines, no, I'm pointing with my hand, these lines here then become more straight, but it's done a few things that I possibly shouldn't have done. So in this case, this is why we do it on a separate layer. We get the regular brush, make it a bit bigger, oops, black, soft, 100%, and on the new layer that we created, we're just going to delete that just off the jawline, because I think it made a bit of a mess of that, or I say it, me, made a bit of a mess, but I quite like it down here, so I'm going to put that back. Okay, and then toggle on and off again. In fact, I'm not too keen on this bit here, so we'll bin that off as well. Okay, apart from that, I think it's good to go. Zoom in, just make sure there's no mess at the boundary. And there's a little bit of thing up there, isn't there? Just there, which I think we can do with the mixer brush. So we'll just quickly just blend those together. And note that it didn't blur the hair because that's not on this layer, it's on the high frequency layer. So we can toggle that on and off. We can see that it's dealt with that little bump there as well. Okay, there's a few more bits there that we can just blend together, and there we go. Okay, now, as I said earlier, we don't want it on eyes and things like that, so we're going to put a white mask on, get the regular brush, again 100% black, soft edge, and we're just going to go around the edges of things that should have detail in and put them back in. So, you know, the eyebrows, around the eyes there. So even though we didn't blur the eyes, they do get kind of dragged in. Edge of the nose. These are the facial features that you really need to be sharp and in focus and whatnot. So make sure that that's the case. You don't want to use any of your sort of blurring techniques on there. We want that to be sharp as well. And we'll get a little... get it off this jewellery, and any hard shadows you don't want it on either, and anywhere where there's creases in the body we're going to need to blend these in, but I'm just knocking them off for now, and then we'll put back white and just come up to the edges of those with a soft brush. There we go. Okay. And then we can toggle the effect on and off and just make sure that it's not destroying anything that we'd rather keep, anything else that needs to be masked, or any bits that we've forgotten to smooth. But I think that's overall a fairly good job. I think we could possibly do a little bit more down here. You can collapse those now and just go back and do a bit more work on here. Let's see what we can do with a bigger value. There we go. Let's got rid of any imperfections that were left on there, and there we are. All right, happy with that. So let's flatten the image again. Now, one of the things that again is not particularly apparent on this image, but is worth demonstrating, is evening the skin colour. Now, a lot of people have red patches on the chest here, and then the ears as well on hands tend to be redder. And if you're doing a beauty image like this, you want it to be even. And there's a very specific way really of doing this. So using the hue saturation layer, make the properties box quite wide because you're going to need to be quite fine grained. Oh, it's not letting me grab that. With the adjustment. Now, to figure out which bit that we need to change, we're going to drag the What's going on with this thing? What's the matter with it? Right, we're going to drag the hue all the way over. And we can see what's selected now. Or actually, we don't want to do it on the master. We want to do it just on reds. So we're going to change that to reds, do the same thing. We can see it's selected obviously the lips because they're red and the skin partially, but we don't want all of that. We just want the, what's the matter with this today? You know, Adobe produce some wonderful software which is functionally rich, but it just runs like a three-legged donkey sometimes. And their ability to architect software is woeful. So right, okay, so this is what we want. Right, so I've got hard edge on the selection, on the reds here, and I'm moving the selection about until we can just get just the edge of the colours that we want to affect. And then I'm going to feather it in just slightly. I'm going to knock that back a little bit. And we don't want it to affect all skin, right? Because obviously then we'll just make the whole thing a different colour. But it's just the red bits, okay? We'll try that. So now what we do is we bring this up probably to about +9. And if we're unsure, we can toggle it on and off. And we can see that it's subtle, but it's got rid of the little red bits in there. Put a bit of saturation in and then raise the lightness. Now raising the lightness gets rid of saturation, so that's why we compensate by putting the saturation to about the same value. Again, toggle on and off, and hopefully we should see that red bits of the skin are now less red. But we don't want it over the whole image. We certainly don't want it on the lips. And we possibly don't want it on the rest of the face, especially on the cheeks. So I think what we'll do is we'll leave it on a white mask, and we're going to take it off other areas, starting with the lips. So we'll definitely go over that with our 100% black brush, and we'll do sort of cheek area here. Should definitely have some of that. Now have a look at the eyes. You probably need, especially the corner of the eyes there, should be red, but we could possibly reduce it a little bit in there, just on the edges. So I'm going to put it back at 100%, and then I'm going to change the brush to 50%, put it back to white, and then I'm going to paint over just the edges of the eye there. But the corner I'm going to leave, right? And then we might go to 20% black, and just remove a little bit off the face in general. Okay, and we can look at the ear as well. Toggle on, off, on, off, on. We can see that that's dealt with the redness in the ear. There's a bit of red in this brooch, so we'll toggle that on and off, but it's kind of okay, so we'll leave that alone. All right, I think that's worth doing. Again, it's subtle on this one. Dean's got really good skin, so it's not really an issue. But on a lot of people, you know, especially sort of more sort of Caucasian skin, paler skin, you do get quite a bit of redness across the chest, and it's worth dealing with in a sort of fine art portrait sort of way. All right, we'll collapse that and get rid of the properties box, and think about what we're going to do next. So I think we need to deal with the lips. So you can see on here, we're going to make a new layer, and we're going to try a number of things, I think, in dealing with this. I think we can set up, again, we can set up a little fence on the lip. And again, we're going to try the quick select. The edges I'm not too bothered about. the outside edges, it's just this. So then we're going to deselect in there. We may end up just using the pen tool for this. This might be just a... I like to use a quick select because it retains the kind of, you know, the little fine details on the edge, whereas the pen tool is literally just a curve, which is fine for some things but not for others. I think that's good for our purposes actually. So I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to get the clone. We're just going to copy bits of colour and texture up like that. Particularly want to duplicate that line, so just go over that again. And again, we're sort of painting on this, and we can check just by taking the stamp on and off, the selection on and off. In fact, we'll keep it off and do this little bit here, right up. I probably don't want to do right in. Oops, what's gone on there? Okay, we are, got rid of all of it somehow. Just going to go right up to the edge, and it looks a bit artificial at the moment. Now, what do we get up to with the top? Top kind of boundary is a bit unsure of itself, so we can go back to the selection tool and just refine that a little bit. Oops, there we go. Okay, it's auto corrected. Back to the clone. Okay, now we've got a bit there that we don't really want, but toggle that on and off. We can mask that off in a second, but also it's looking a bit artificial. We can try changing the blend mode, but colour isn't really doing it. Saturation, no, because we need the texture as well really. Luminosity, kind of. Luminosity could be good. Let's see how that stacks up to colour. We might stick with normal actually, but we'll put the mask on. Make sure that's deselected. Get a black brush and 100%. And we're just going to go across here that so we don't want that to bleed into the other lip there. We're also going to go just in the gap there. Okay, now we can play around with the opacity of this. I think we're going to knock it back just slightly. Or, so what we might do actually is just get the brush on 20% and just use that to knock that back there. Oops, that's the clone. That's not going to work on the mask, is it? So there's the brush, 20%. So actually I only want to knock it off this area. This here needs to be kind of full on, but this bit here looks a bit sharp. There we go. Just put it back on the top lip. I think the top lip can take the full effect. There we go. And let's see what we've done. That's much better. There we go. And if we zoom out, again, check. Got rid of that little bit there. Okay, so commit that. Okay, more work on the lips. Let's have a look at anything else we need to do here. I think there's a little bit more healing we can do. So we're going to get down into the detail on this. There we go. Just continue that dark patch along there. And this is the kind of thing in Photoshop where you kind of need to apply a little bit of artistry. It's the kind of thing it's possible to get wrong. Some of it is procedural, you know, and you do the thing, you do the effect, and it's all good. But others not. Now, we need to deal with these kind of cut marks, and generally the edge of the lip. Now we want a really sharp edge, and it's not necessarily the edge that's there now, so we're going to use the pen tool for this one. Now just with the pen tool, just click and drag. Actually, another one, just put it right on the point there. If you don't drag, it makes a sharp corner, but otherwise just click and drag. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, and then when you're finished, get the mouse rather than the pen, it's just easier. Hold the control key down, right, select that, select it again, and now you can manipulate, keep holding the control key, and now you can manipulate individual points. So just drag them to where you want them to be. And you know, it's pretty good at the moment, but we can just make some small improvements. These little handles, by the way, control the sort of nature of the curve. You can flatten the curve out. I'm going to just bring the edge of the lips out there. Okay, well, that's pretty good. So now we're going to make a selection out of that, and we're going to feather it in quite a lot. So we're going to go for 6, I think, in this. So new selection, and there it is. Now that's selected the lips. We want the bit that's outside of the lips, so we're going to do Control Shift and I. Okay, and we're now going to get our friend the clone stamp tool again and put it back to 100%, make it soft. So shift and left bracket key, and then we're just going to get a clone source and just take those bits off. Okay, so any other bits that we feel that are distracting, that are nearby, we can get rid of those. Now we could have done it on a separate layer and blended it in with colour. In fact, we might do that. So let's back that off. Okay, so we'll deselect, reselect, duplicate, reselect, and now we've got it on a separate layer. Do the same thing again. So clone like that. Get rid of that thing there. And now we can be quite aggressive with getting rid of stuff there. Set this to colour. Okay, not so much. Okay. So let's, because it's kept the tone. I think that'll work actually. That looks alright. Again, zoom out, hide the selection. I'm off. So now I think we can possibly get away with just reducing the colour on that one. I don't want to get rid of it entirely because it's altering the shape of the mouth. So we're going to go back, get rid of that one. That's it. That'll do. Alright, so we're going to put the selection back, and we can even the edge up a bit there. Check around the edge, make sure that the lip line is good, It looks good to me. The next thing we can do, Photoshop bongs at you for some reason, and I've never come across a reliable reason as to why that is. I'm going to invert the selection, so we're now working on the lips, and we're going to do the same with the clone stamp tool. We're just going to sharpen up the edge just a touch. So I'm going to go right in there, not quite that much. Okay, and then once again, yeah, it's because it's something to do with it having numbers selected, but so let's see what we've done there. Okay, so zoom out, and let's tidy that lip line up. Maybe, you know, knock the opacity back just a little bit, maybe. Okay, and then we've got a nice lip line. So there we go. Now, colour of the lips, we can be just a bit more liberal with the selection on that one. We're just going to set it to multiply just so that we can see where we're painting more than anything. Get the brush. I'm going to knock the sharpness up to stops, make the brush really big, and all I'm really concerned with is this inside thing, or it's on 20%, put it to 100. It's just the inside bit. If it goes outside of the lips on the top, I'm not bothered about that at this point, because I'm just going to paint that off in a minute, and then we're just going to go over the edge here. Actually, I can sometimes get away with fitting the brush in, but it's all about that edge transition, so that's why I need the brush of a certain size and a certain softness, just to get that edge transition right. And this is going to give us a more organic sort of selection for this next adjustment, which is all about colour. Right, now I'm going to zoom out. Obviously that looks terrible. I'm going to keep it on multiply, but we're going to put a hue saturation layer that only affects this new layer. Okay, and we're going to bump up the saturation and the lightness, and you can see as we bump up the lightness, it kind of comes back to where it was before a little bit. So we're going to keep the lightness about there, I think, and then go in. In fact, what we might do is just do this with opacity. Sometimes I do it one way, sometimes the other. Now we can completely change the look of the lipstick on here on the lips, but I quite like that sort of matte look. So the other thing we can do is on this layer is using these blend if sliders, and the one I normally manipulate is underlying layer, and what this means is I can mask the effect of where the underlying layer is of a certain lightness or darkness. So we start moving that across, you can see that it's masking it off the dark areas, but actually I want to mask it off the lighter areas by moving that across. We can actually make the lips look shiny by doing this, but I don't want them completely shiny, so what I'm going to do is you can split this slider which feathers it. So hold the Alt key down and just grab one of the triangles, and you can kind of move that across, and then you can move them independently. So we'll knock it off completely off the highlights, and we could just gradate it across the entire thing just by doing that, or we can come in and maneuver it, make it more aggressively off the highlights, something like that. Toggle it on and off, remember where you started. Okay, and I think we need to go for full saturation. You can also make it darker by doing that, but we're not going to on this occasion. And then on this layer we can then just reduce the opacity, and you can see it's just darkened the lips. For more aggressive makeup you may want to do some real changes to that. You can change the hue as well on there, so you know, we could change the hue in that direction or in that direction. You know, if we move it over there, we can't really see the effect, but make it to 100, and then you can change the hue by moving the hue slider about. That's pretty cool. So we could go for more of a sort of pink look. Quite like that actually. What's the neutral one look like about there? Maybe reduce it just slightly. There we go. Don't go too wild with it. Sometimes these things overlap, so you've just got to play with them a little bit. I think that's about right. And then reduce the opacity back down again. 26%. It's a subtle change. We're just going to put it up a little bit. 36. There we go. Zoom out. Have a look. Yeah, I like it. Okay, layer, flatten image. And we're almost there really. There's some work to do on the eyes, and possibly a little bit more evening up to do on the lips. Now, I think I'm going to use another frequency separation layer on this, specifically on the lips. So I'm going to click on the lips there. It's going to be a different boundary, so I'm going to go to about there, and then on there we're going to duplicate that. We're going to get the mixer brush, make it small, and we're just going to kind of blend this line a little bit here to make it a bit straighter. There we are, and just check what we've done. There we go, that's blended that in quite nicely. We can do a bit more just there. And there we go. And once we've done that, we'll just go to screen. Knock this off the darker layer because I just want to put a highlight on there. Just on the lips. Feather it a little bit. There we go. Obviously we don't want that on the rest, so we're going to put a black mask on, get a white brush. Oh, that's the mixer brush, don't want that, the regular brush. Make it soft, 100%. Paint that on there like so, maybe do a little bit of a sheen on the top lip. Take that off the edge there. Okay, but we don't want it, we don't quite that much or anywhere near that much, so again we'll knock it back, about 30%. Yeah, there we go. Okay, eyes. I'm going to come up here and we're actually just going to individually, again using our friendly spot healing brush, we're just going to go over these little bits here. Nothing fancy, and we need some of them, so it's just the more obvious ones that are more in the centre of the eye that we'll clean off. The spot healing brush is really good for this because it doesn't need you to have a clone source. That's not really worked, is it? There we go. Do the other one. just the obvious bits. Right, once that's done, get another hue saturation adjustment layer, and I'm going to go to the yellows, and we're going to take the saturation down and the lightness up and put a black mask on that, so invert the mask. White brush, and just take it off. Again, that's not the brush. There we go. White brush, 100% soft. Just take that off the there, off the white bits. Check around here, there's a bit in there as well. It's just going to make that, and we might just do the same for the reds as well. Not so much. It's a bit of an odd effect, that, really. Okay. Then zoom out. You can hardly make out really what that does, but it's worth doing. The only other thing we're going to do to the eyes, I think, is just brighten them a bit. So we're going to create a custom curves layer here. Now, people used to do this by on the eye whites, putting a screen layer on. I found that that makes the eyes look a bit flat. They are spherical, so we need to retain that. Obviously we don't want it over the rest of the image, so get rid of that. Get the brush tool again, white 100%. Make it just a little bit bigger than the eyeball, the iris, and then just dab that on. And then I'm going to zoom in and delete it. Make the brush smaller, sorry, and black, and just get rid of it off the surrounding pieces that aren't eyeball. And again, check what you've done. It's just making the eyes brighter. Probably a bit too much, if I'm honest. We'll drag that down a little bit. In fact, we want just a little bit more in the shadows, just to lift those just a little bit there. Play around with it, knock the opacity down, so it's just subtle changes. There we go. All right, finishing touches. Eyelashes look good. I have got some false eyelash brushes, but they're a bit hit and miss. We can do though is just put a bit of red on the cheeks, a bit of blusher. So again, soft brush, but this time at 10% flow and 10% opacity on that layer there, and we're just going to dab that on, and we're going to go, it's too much, but we're going to do two things. I thought I've gone a bit too deep on that one, haven't I? Okay, so let's try that again. Just want to do it across the cheekbone there, just a little bit on there. Okay, so we're going to do two things. We're going to set it to colour, so we're not changing the luminosity values, and then again we're going to knock the opacity back and just creep it in there. Look at this at quite far out because it becomes more pronounced, and toggle it on and off. It's a little too much. We're going to go down to about 50. Okay, probably still a little too much, about 40. Well, that's about right, I reckon. Right, now then, last bit of processing on the skin. I'm going to duplicate the layer, take the saturation out, duplicate that, so we've got two black and white layers. And I'm going to work with the first one, and on both of these we're going to apply a high pass layer. Now one's going to be put some contrast back. We're going to go for about 30 on that. Put the blend mode to soft light. Now that's going to look terrible. Okay, we just need a little bit of that, probably about 20, 19, 20. You can see how it just brings a bit more definition into it, just maybe just a touch less. This one we're just going to do the fine edges, So again, high pass, and we'll do 2, I think, but this one we're going to set to overlay, and then have a look around the image, toggle it on and off, see if it does anything bad anywhere. No, I think it's pretty good actually, but again we're going to knock it back, but probably about 40% on this one, maybe a bit less, about 30. Okay, you see what we've done there, it's just sharpened up the image. I'm going to flatten that out. Now one thing we can do is put a bit of shine into this, so we can create a screen layer and just put it to where it just starts to affect some of the skin, and then split the slider, take that off like that, and then you can play around with this and you can see that it produces quite a nice sort of sheen effect on the model. It's also affecting the background a little bit, but actually I don't mind that particularly. Again, that looks pretty cool, but we don't want all of it. Again, the opacity slider is your friend. Okay, you can see that kind of sheen has appeared now, which just gives it a little bit more three-dimensionality. We're going to do this in 2 layers, so I'm going to spread this one out a little bit more. And then we're going to put this one on to screen as well. But remember that these are clones of the original layer before I applied the first screen, and that's important. If you build on top and on top, it gets really crunchy. So make lots of copies of the background. If you need another copy, just go and clone it off the background, not off the layer you've just done. Again, we're on there, and this time we're going to go over until it's just the highlights, really, and then feather it in. Okay, just like that. And again, I'm going to knock that back just so that it's just a little bit, just a nice little bit of kick to it. And then again, always check what you've done, and check for the overall thing, and check that when you zoomed out, you see how much that's sort of lifted the sort of three-dimensionality of that. I think it's probably a little bit too much. I'm going to put it in a group, and I'm going to reduce the opacity of the overall thing to about 80. Maybe that highlight layer needs to come down a bit more. There we go. All right. So happy with that. Flatten. Now, there's still a little bit of a dark patch under the eyes there, and the way we're going to deal with that is just with a good old curves layer. And we're going to get the brush. We're just going to do this manually. We've got 10 and 10, 10% white to put that adjustment on. And we're just going to brush over this multiple times. Okay, and again, checking as we go, just to get rid of that dark spot. Okay, we can also sort of fill in gaps in the and make that transition a little bit smoother there. And maybe the same on this side, we'll just put a bit of highlight on the cheek there. There we go. Just to lift that a touch, and we can straighten this out a little bit. And we can also make another curves layer. We don't need this to be this wide now. Let's make another layer, opposite direction. Again, put that in, and then we can just fill in that little gap there. Okay. And again, we can see what that's doing. maybe a little bit strong. So we'll knock it off, just that bit down there, we don't quite want it. As we're at 10%, we have to draw multiple times. There we go. Now we could do lots more dodging and burning. So while we're here, we could accentuate some of the shadows actually, just down here on the creases in the skin. Oh, we're on black, that's why that's not doing anything. When you're doing a subtle effect like this, sometimes you can kid yourself that you're actually making changes, and you're not. So we're on 10%. I think the jawline, increasing the shadows under the chin gives you just a bit more definition. And under the lips, we're just going to put a bit more shadow that makes the lips look a bit fuller, just under the bottom edge of the lips as well, and then into the gap there, under the nose, maybe just a touch under the, just on the top of the eyelid there. And on the eyebrows, just make those a bit darker and denser. And then again for the lights, again we can just be a bit creative on this. We can do just a bit on the skin where the existing highlights are, just to bring them up a little bit. Okay, right, let's check what we've done. This doesn't look like much when you're doing it, but overall you can put those dodge and burns into a group. Now you can carry on doing this forever, but we're close to done here. One of the things I want to do though is even up the composition a little bit. So I'm going to go to the crop tool because I want a bit more space on this side, because she's facing that way. Okay, and put content aware on. Never do delete pixels because I might want that back. Oops, I've forgotten to flatten the image first. Right, flatten the image. You could just do it on the base layer and that would work if you didn't want to flatten the image, but this is just the way I tend to do it. We could be scientific about it and put in a ratio. So because this is a nice, and it's snapping because I've got snap set on view. This is not all, oh dear me, miskeyed. You don't always want it to snap, in which case turn that off, but on this case we do. I'm just going to bring it all the way across there. Now, this may go horribly wrong, but we're going to add that chunk onto the side. We probably won't keep all of it, certainly not for all crops of this. Things like sites like Purple Port punish really wide images. They tend to look really small on the site, so I normally do a less wide version for that. You can see it's a little bit funky. So what we'll do is we're going to stick with 2 to 3. I think we'll go back to 2 to 3, but we're just going to move her across a little bit. Okay, like so. That's a bit less aggressive, be easier for Photoshop to make that up. There we go, that works for me. Okay, now, even though we've only got one layer, we need to flatten the image because we've got no background. So when we save the image, it will try and create a background structure and it will make the file bigger. So I'm going to flatten the image and that changes to a background. And then we can save it. Oh, before I save it, we're just going to do some final selective sharpening, just with the good old sharpen tool, which I've got on 50%. Just going to go around the features that we want to pull out. And that's about it really. Nothing else needs to be done to that. File, save, not. And back in Lightroom, we should see that image appear eventually. There it is. And now we can play around with the tones. Now we can try the beauty split toning, and I think that's going to work well. Before we do that though, I'm going to turn that back off and we're going to go to the profile. I'm going to browse. Now it just says colour now because the raw information is gone. Now we've got all these different versions that we can now apply. And we can reduce the opacity of them. So we've got all those artistic ones. Number 4 sometimes does interesting things at lower opacities. We've also got the modern selection. Right, so I mean, again, number 4 out of the modern selection looks pretty cool. So if we go up there, you can see with and without. I think just a touch of that might look alright actually. Although it's doing a few funky things. I quite like original tones actually. Let's get rid of the presets panel, history. I kind of like it like that. What I might do though, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a custom vignette, and I'm just going to use the circle tool for this. So we don't want it inverted, I want it about -70, and we're going to just start in the centre of the eye and just drag it out. Okay, now you can put it to 1/16, make the image small again. Hold the shift key down. You might think, well, the circle's bigger than the image, right? But with the mask, you can see it's even darkening her because of the high feather on the mask, and I really like the high feather. And you can toggle it on and off, you can see what it's doing, and I think that's really pulling that in, but I probably don't want it quite that much. Just a subtle thing really. There we go, so -1/3 of a stop, that's all. I think we're pretty much done with that. We can try the split toning, so let's do that. And again, I'm going to look at it in this small view. I quite like that actually. I can toggle it on and off. I quite like what it's done to the background. I'm not so keen on the foreground of the skin tone, so what I might do is just make it more towards the blue, and also knock the saturation out of the highlights a little bit. I don't quite want so much of that sand colour. On her skin, toggle on and off, and in fact I don't want quite so much of it on the background either, just a subtle bit, so 6 points of blue in the shadows. And then we can go to here and try vibrance and things like that to bring some of the colour back, because we worked on a low contrast version of this image, remember, at the beginning, so we might knock some of that back up. Again, look at the white points. You know, the image is in danger of becoming a bit flat, so we can take that up just a touch. Shadows, definitely not up, probably not down. I think it's kind of fine where it is. The blacks look a bit punchy, if I'm honest. They're not, nothing is black, but sometimes with these kind of light images it's nice to just lift it up a little bit. Okay, and again we can check what we've done in Lightroom. It's basically that. I think we're alright. Now, the only thing that sometimes happens is when you export these images, it actually adds contrast. Now I'm going to let Lightroom decide what contrast should be applied. And it's always a negative number, and then I normally just put that back up by just a bit, and then when I export the image, we'll come back to full size there. When I export the image, it will add a bit of contrast back in. It's just something I've noticed, that it's never quite the same. So we're going to go for what I call wallpaper. These are my presets. So, and I'm going to put the logo on the right hand side. I've got the sharpening amount set to low because we did a lot of sharpening in Photoshop. And we're just going to export that. And there it is. Can open that up, full screen, and there's our finished image. Now, once you've got into doing one of these, the rest of them you'll do the same, and they will take a lot less time because you'll remember the choices that you did. You know, do them one after the other. For the Lightroom stuff at the beginning, you can just clone it. Just copy the settings off the one you did before to keep them consistent. And again, for the Lightroom changes you do on the after, copy those from the after of the first one that you did. But that's pretty much all of the techniques that are used on beauty. Sometimes we clean up the edge of the eyebrows. We didn't need to do that in this case, but this one's pretty much done. So hope that was useful. And you didn't fall asleep too many times watching this. As I say, this is probably not the start of a YouTube channel. It's just really to complete the journey that we started on set shooting the images. So I hope you found it useful, and who knows, maybe there'll be some more.